Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 12, a deeper look into balanced dog training. Hey guys, welcome back to the Dog Trainers Podcast. This is episode 12, a deeper look, balanced dog training. Now, we got such a wonderful response from our last episode, a deeper look, pure positive training, that we decided to keep this going for a bit. We're going to dissect yet another training method. My name is Mariano. That's Brent. You can find us on Instagram. My Instagram is UNTAMEDDOGCO. That's all one word, UNTAMEDDOGCO. You can find Brent at CANISBEHAVIor, C-A-N-I-S behavior. Again, all one word. So we're excited to dissect this thing, and I'm going to kick it over to you, Brent.
Thank you so much, Mariano. How you been, man? It's been a
Pretty
whole
good.
week since I've heard from you.
I know, man. It's been a busy one, I think, for you too.
It's been busy. Hey, but they are loosening up some of these quarantine stay-at-home things.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty excited about it. I can't wait for that day I can go and eat real food other than stuff that I'm making at the house.
What's wrong with stuff at the house?
Well, yeah. Well, it's
Actually, I get you. I'm
you
just
get what
putting
I'm saying. Like,
yeah.
I just want to go. I just want to go eat food that someone else has made for me.
Episode 12, a deeper look
something not
into
from a
balanced
box.
dog
Also,
training.
that would be ideal. But anyways, welcome back, everybody. As Mariano said, this is our balanced dog training episode where we're going to break down some of the good practices, bad practices of balanced dog training. But we're also going to go ahead and talk about what balanced dog training is. That's super important. So I guess let's dive into what it is. Balanced dog training, in essence, if we're going to put it together in several sentences, or I'm going to try my best to put it in one sentence, balanced dog training is a multidisciplined approach in training where we are able to customize and design specific program protocols for the type of dog that we're training. Now I know this might be able to be applied to a bunch of different types of dog training. However, the difference between balanced dog training is that we pull from a bunch of different training philosophies, techniques, ideas, theories, practices in order to be able to get our clients, both the human and the dog clients, to be able to get understand each other on a more balanced level. Right. Obviously when we say the word balanced, we are leaning towards the middle, right? That's one way to look at this. However, it's a sliding scale in the middle is kind of how I look at it, because there are some dogs who need a little bit more of this. There are some dogs who need a little bit more of that. And our job as balanced dog trainers is to be able to assess, and not only assess, but to be able to have the knowledge and experience in a multidisciplined approach to be able to help as many dogs as possible with those different knowledge bases.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out for people, because I completely agree with that statement, that it's a job of a good balanced trainer to seek the middle. Mm-hmm. The middle isn't always exactly the middle, but the concept is there. You know, if a dog needs a little bit more of this type of method versus this type of method, it doesn't necessarily mean that the dog would do its best under only one form. You know, for an example, let's say the two big camps are always like pure positive versus, you know, what's like the absolute maximum. I think in most people's heads, let's just say like e-collar work is like the epitome of corrective training as people see it. They think of e-collars as like, if your dog is really, really bad, right? Mm-hmm. And we know that's not the case, but
no. Just
as an example, it's rarely like 50% of each of these. The truth is somewhere in between. So it'll be like 80% food work with 20% e-collar, or, you know, vice versa, depending on the dog and the situation. So I completely agree with that statement. You know, so for young trainers listening to us, just keep in mind, the middle isn't always at 50, but wherever it does exist, you find that and you work from there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think seeking the balance is something that we'll talk about a little bit later, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So I personally consider myself a balanced dog trainer. Mariano, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So let's go ahead and dive in a little bit into our stories, how we became balanced dog trainers. I'll go ahead and get started. So when I learned how to be a dog trainer in the very beginning, it wasn't all necessarily, it definitely was a very unevolved version of what I do now. right? However, what I was introduced to, this is something we can talk about later in a different podcast. I was introduced to a very traditional form of training, which is called the Keeler method of dog training. And Keeler method is one of the more traditional military forms of dog training. A lot of leash involved, a lot of correction involved, a lot of collars involved. And this form of dog training, again, in context, was designed for dogs who were aggressive, who were about to get put down, or who were about to get euthanized. So the pool of dogs that this training method was created from was the very driven, stubborn, dominant, reactive, aggressive type dogs, right? So as a byproduct of that, a lot of the methods were pretty heavy-handed. Definitely it did kind of sway a little bit more to this idea that dogs in essence were trying to control you. So I definitely know what it's like to have a dominance dog mentality, right? Where dogs are dominant creatures, and if you don't control them first, they're going to learn to control you, yada, yada, yada. All the things we've talked about in other podcasts that don't sit right with anyone nowadays.
Right.
But just like anything, you learn, and eventually what happens is you learn the limits of that method or technique or philosophy that you run, which eventually forces you to learn something different or something new. Now, as it usually goes in my story, I went from one extreme to a very different extreme, where I went from correction-based and pressure-based training to where now I wanted to work with motivation. I wanted to work with food. I wanted to work with all these different things. And what happened to me specifically over 10 years was there were many dogs that I would run into that I'd be able to help. And then there would be a handful of dogs that I wouldn't be able to help, that I wasn't able to be effective with, that in essence, I felt I let the dogs down. Mm-hmm. I let their owners down. And it got to this point where my passion for wanting to help more animals forced me to continue to learn things. So I would read books. I would watch seminars, I'd go to seminars. I'd watch videos. I would download and pay for any subscription thing that I could pay for and watch at the time so I could learn something new. And I remember a very powerful video. It was Michael Ellis's The Power of Training Dogs with Food. And I remember seeing this complete different look at dog training, and what it did, it opened my eyes up to a spectrum of dog training. I didn't really know what it was or what it was going to be called later in the future, but I started to see all these different toolboxes to choose from, right? Like I had my driver set, I had my wrench set, I had my, all these different tools that now where I just thought before I had a hammer and some nails, so I had a big diverse group of tools. And gradually through the years, what we started diving into is I started diving into a little bit more of like competitive food work. I started diving into some protection work and things like that. I started diving into behavioral modification and reading a lot of studies and getting to work with a couple of veterinary behaviorists nearby to just understand their philosophies and their ideas and being able to put their things to practice, or their philosophies to practice. And so you start to, the more knowledge I gained, the more that the matrix in my brain started connecting all the dots. And I had this matrix of knowledge in my brain that eventually would later become my version of balanced dog training, right? And so that's how I started. How did you start?
I started in the Air Force. So I actually started in a very similar light. A lot of Keeler method, a lot of leash work, a lot of high pressure, like working dog stuff that we were training dogs on Lackland Air Force Base and just sending them wherever they needed to be. And after that, you and I met, and then it was Bobby and you and Corey and, just kind of learning things and figuring out the ins and outs of more leash work that was kind of more tailored to a client's perspective as opposed to a dog with a very specific job to do, but more of a well-rounded pet that needed to know when to turn it on, but also when to turn it off, how to socialize well with other dogs. And when we look at the balanced dog training spectrum, I was definitely in that same camp of being maybe a little more heavy-handed and a little more, there wasn't enough nuance to my dog training game, at least from a client's perspective. I mean, maybe for military dogs, that's the way to go, but in that case, now we're talking something completely different with like purpose-bred built dogs that it's not quite the same thing. So later in my training career, me and Brent have made this joke before. I forget, maybe on one of our other videos and thing, you and I have similar yet very different training backgrounds because you were lucky enough to hang out with Bobby for like a really long time. Bobby Durafshar, a great behaviorist, probably one of the great behaviorists of our time. Whereas I was kind of the different, going like to different kennels and learning different methods. And we got back together like years later. We were always, in context, we're friends, but like as trainers, we found ourselves working together again a few years later. And we realized that there was just so much valuable insight that each of us had learned in our respective paths to that point. And where that brought me ultimately with training was I, just like you, really started to understand the value of food work and of motivational work. And corrections definitely have their place, but I would say that I just got more potent with them. So I can do them less. I can do them softer, lower, however you want to look at
less
it.
Frequent, yeah.
Less frequent, right. And still get a really good result out of it. And in so doing, I also got better at my overall understanding of dog training as a whole. It's not just about corrections. It's not just about motivation. It's about routine, socialization, behavioral development, and all these different things. And that's allowed me to kind of perfect my game. So to this date, I think that these days I'm kind of at my optimum in terms of my understanding of dog training. And of course, this is going to evolve over time. We're always learning. Yeah. But at this moment, I'm pretty happy with the package that we're able to present here today, and and see what we can get out of balanced training as an idea here.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
We'll see you next time.